Buonasera, friends, and welcome back to something a little bit different. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about how trends in mainstream culture are cyclical, and yeah, I know you all know that. I'm not gonna be fake deep here and try to tell you something profound and perhaps thought provoking about our unstable and apparently collapsing Western culture, which seems to absolutely not know where the hell to go if not directly inside of an active volcano of eternal hate, tribalistic division, and pain. But yeah, trends are cyclical. Especially in the last few years, it seems that our revivalist tendencies have shot up to the sky, and everything seems to come back every few years, almost as if we're destined to live in an eternal now. And stuff that used to seem ridiculous suddenly becomes ironically cool. And oh, look, now it's unironically cool. But oh, everybody's doing it, so we have to find something else that we can attach our whole identity to like a bunch of leeches. And oh, look here. If you're more or less in my age bracket and found this channel because you like horror, chances are that some of our tastes were influenced by the same stuff. And we used to listen to at least some of the same artists and bands back in the day. Admittedly, I came a little bit late to the game, when most of these artists were already in a sort of decline, if we can even really call it that. That didn't stop me though from listening to all of their stuff and basically making it my whole angry, godless teenager identity. In time, I moved on to what I thought were more, sophisticated tastes. But I kept exploring music and finding tons of new stuff, ever wilder and more experimental, until at a certain point I asked myself, am I actually enjoying this? And the answer was yes, absolutely. But still, it felt like something was missing. It was almost as if I had lost my old ability to just enjoy music without having to deconstruct it and rate it or critique it in some way in my own head.
The needle drop did more damage to our musical perception than anyone in history.
And so I found myself going back to those old bands that I used to love dearly before. That actually jump-started my love for music, and asking myself, why did I start to hate them and thought they were super cringe all of a sudden? Were they actually that bad? Short answer, no, not at all. And I bet that many people like me have gone through a similar process, even outside of music. Our perception of good or bad is incredibly tied to our current cultural zeitgeist. Nowadays, it's almost as if we're reevaluating everything that at the time we thought was cringe and suddenly defending it and explaining why, actually, it was le good all along. Obviously, it's not that simple. It is great that we can finally be less cynical about the mainstream trends of the past, instead embracing them for what they were, a product of their time that might actually have had a lot of strengths. But at the same time, this seems to be at the cost of being more cynical towards the present. And not really in a I hate my generation kind of way, and more in a
What the fuck is going on?
we'll get out of it eventually. Maybe. Now, let's not kid ourselves around. Obviously, all of these artists, or most of them, became pretty big. And that's also because in many cases, they were radio friendly and were under a big label. Nothing wrong with that. This does mean, though, that some of them sacrificed things like deep lyrics and songwriting to just throw out stuff that worked and would be played on the air. But, you know, music is more than that. The whole discourse doesn't have to be that deep or complicated. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, good, who cares? So, what I want to do in this video is just go down memory lane and take you with me. Look at all of those artists from my teen angst phase and see if I would still actually enjoy them. And also see how they've evolved through time and what different paths they've taken. I thought about making this a ranking video, but I'm honestly so tired of seeing the same formats being repeated over and over again. So I hope you can follow it in this way too. Now, a big disclaimer is obviously needed. All of this is gonna be my opinion, alright? Keep that in mind for the love of God. If I say that I think one of these bands is absolute garbage, I'm not trying to fake objectivity, it's just what I feel. Music is subjective. It's great if you actually love them. In fact, please, I would really be interested to know why. If you find yourself flabbergasted at some of my takes, please write a comment telling me why you, personally, love the specific artist or band. It might actually change the way I see them, and obviously, the more music I like and can listen to, the happier I'll be. Okay? Cool. So now let's friggin' jump into it. And let's start with the most obvious band.
Linkin Park.
First of all, rest in peace, Chester. It still hurts. Now, obviously I had to start with Linkin Park. They were probably the most iconic band for my generation, which was the first to grow up on the internet. They were also the first alternative band that I personally listened to. I had no idea that people could scream in songs. I used to have like 30 songs on my iPod by people like Shakira and Rihanna before that. Obviously, these guys were quite a shock for me, especially when I heard Faint for the first time. They were basically the gateway that took me from the top 40 to Big Destroyer. There's a great in-depth video by the punk rock MBA called The Misunderstood Genius of Linkin Park, which I encourage you to watch. These guys were much more than just a band. They were a whole-ass mixed media project. And it's one of the most painful examples of artists which many people, for some reason, started to look down on. And yeah, I get it, their music often followed the same structure that most radio rock music follows. You know, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. With choruses usually having simple power chords being played in 4/4. So I get how some people can kinda get tired of it and yada yada yada. But you know what? Who cares? That's not the point. These guys made history. Also, let's not even get into AMVs, alright? If you know, you know. They genuinely started off well. Even the most cynical people among you can't deny it. Just listen to Hybrid Theory. It's a rock-solid record, and basically the sound of an era. Among all big nu metal bands, they might have been the ones to incorporate hip-hop into their music in the most natural way. These boys had range. Just listen to the breakbeat Breaking Habit demo from 2002.
The one without vocals, please. Don't get it wrong.
Speaking of Breaking the Habit, the song itself is the sound of me standing in a comic book store at 12 years old buying Death Note. And it might have the best music video ever. And this was another important aspect for most of these bands, music videos, which we could now watch on YouTube on repeat and get even more obsessed. I won't deny that I can't really enjoy most of the stuff they made after Meteora, except maybe a few tracks from A Thousand Suns. Still, even though I personally think they kinda got worse and worse, their earlier efforts can be ignored, and we can't ignore the huge impact that they had on Western culture. All in all, Linkin Park are still worth a listen. The perfect storm of teenage angst. And you know what? I'll give you 5 song recommendations if you somehow haven't listened to them. I'll go with Breaking the Habit, With You, Waiting for the End, Cure for the Itch, Forgotten. Moving on, just to say on nu metal and keep the mood positive, let's go with
Slipknot.
Slipknot is honestly surprising. They're probably the only band that transitioned from that era of music to today, becoming somehow even more well-known than before. And also being weirdly well-respected, even though many like me seem to think that their later records are kinda But again, that's just a question of opinion. Obviously, they've been quite successful. The most surprising thing about Slipknot, though, looking back, is how f***ing heavy they were. I mean, these dudes borderlined on death metal sometimes, especially in Iowa. So it's really crazy that they managed to get this big and ended up on the charts. While I might not be the biggest Slipknot fan, it's undeniable that their musicianship is rock solid. They deviated most of the time from the usual radio song structure and could obviously play their respective instruments incredibly well. While you might look at some of the bands on this list and feel like they're not even putting in any effort, the same cannot be said for Slipknot. Also, when it comes to lyrics, Corey is probably a standout among all of those bands. His stuff goes from weird and obscure to stupidly funny, but it always feels like he's writing it himself, which cannot be said for many of their competitors.
Take a shot for every band that used the fall from grace line or that said something about crawling. It's actually crazy how repetitive they got.
And we cannot ignore the fact that they were probably the most successful band to use the masks and costumes gimmick. I do have one big complaint that applies to a few bands on this list, and it's why the hell did they have to make such bloated albums? Like, can't you trim the fat and make it like a 45 minutes tight record? There was definitely lots of filler in many of these LPs, which in some cases makes it hard to give them more of a chance, because a type of sound that works for a 45 minutes record might absolutely become grating if it lasts more than an hour.
And just to make it clear, I have zero problems with long-ass records, if the duration makes sense.
So, overall, I'd say that these dudes are just iconic, especially their first two albums. They absolutely hold up, maybe even better now than at the time. The 5 songs this time would be Surfacing, Gently, Wait and Bleed, Iowa, Scissors.
Korn.
So, you know what I just said about bloated albums that have no real business being so long? Enter Korn. These albums don't need to last more than 45 minutes, let alone more than an hour. Also, how many goddamn albums have these dudes made? Actual insanity. Obviously, if we're talking about nu metal, we can't ignore Korn. They're an absolutely iconic band. From that clunky bass tone that everyone always mentions, to their spastic guitars, to honestly some great-ass drumming, to Jonathan Davis's vocals. Listen, I'm kind of split on Korn, and it's due in no small part to Davis's voice. On the one side, it's absolutely unique and original, and stuff like the 2006 Unplugged album proved that he has real skill. On the other hand, it can get just so darn annoying for me. It's also weird because at the same time, it's one of those voices that bring back the most nostalgia for me. I guess that just goes to show how memorable it is. Moving on, it's also worth mentioning that, just like in the case of Slipknot, these guys could be heavy as fuck. Much heavier than you'd expect from such a huge and well-known band, and that gets my respect. I have no idea of what they've been doing lately, and these album covers don't really attract me in the slightest, if I gotta be honest, but I respect the fact that they just keep doing their thing. It's also impressive that they managed to bounce back after the critical failure of that Bro Step album. I mean, mad props for experimenting, but just because you can do something, it doesn't mean you should.
Lord, it truly is as abysmal as I remember.
They've got so many iconic songs, I just wish that they made like 1/3 of them. But I can't really throw too much shade on Korn. Again, they're the sound of an era, and I think that anyone can find something they'll enjoy among their infinite discography. My picks would be Blind, Here to Stay, Killing, Falling Away From Me, Love and Meth.
Deftones.
Okay, I'm cheating here. I didn't actually listen to Deftones when I was a kid. I just wanted to put them on this list because they're in a league of their own. An actual classic. They kept reinventing themselves without sacrificing their songwriting, which is more than you can say about any of the other bands on this list. Just listen to Deftones and thank me later. Here's 5 songs to start: Needles and Pins, Knife Party, Risk, The Spell of Mathematics, Xerxes.
It's so hard to pick, honestly. I love Deftones. Limp Bizkit.
I mean, it just takes balls to call your band Limp Bizkit. That's already worth something. So these guys are another staple of nu metal, and probably one of the most regularly derided bands on this list.
For God's sake, their last album is literally called Limp Bizkit Still Sucks.
And you know what? They deserved better. They're all absolutely good musicians, especially John Otto on the drums and Sam Rivers on the bass. And obviously everybody knows about Wes Borland. Now, what really makes or breaks Limp Bizkit for listeners is the man himself, William Frederick Durst, better known as Fred Durst. Is he a good singer? No. Is he a good rapper? Arguable. But does he have charisma? He comes across like the kind of guy that would be insecure about his height.
$3 bill, y'all? More like 3 feet tall, y'all?
He seems like the kind of guy that would be a secondary character in an American Pie movie. He looks like the kind of dude that would tell you that drunk driving is the best. He seems... alright, you get it. His vocals really do sound like the squeaking you get when you clean a window, and his lyrics might as well have been written by a 12-year-old half of the time. I've never really been a fan of the Bizkit, but at the same time, I don't really get the hate. They're dumb fun, and they obviously bask in their goofiness. It's honestly impressive that they had any success after calling an album The Chocolate Starfish and the Hot Dog Flavored Water.
My lord.
Their first two records definitely have some tracks that are worth your time. But would I say that they hold up? Yeah, dude. Even though it's mostly in a time capsule kind of way for me. The 5 songs this time would be Counterfeit, Rearranged, The Truth, Boiler, Stinkfinger.
Cold Chamber.
No, just listen to Devil Driver. To close the whole rap metal thing, let's mention a low-hanging fruit.
Hollywood Undead.
Fellas, one question. Why? Why were these guys ever popular? Why are they still making music? And most importantly, why the hell did I used to listen to them? As a matter of fact, and this is confession time, not only did I listen to them, but me and my 2 best buds from way back then went to a rehearsal studio a couple of times. And you know what one of the songs that we tried to play was? Undead. It's actually embarrassing, especially when I was the one with the microphone in hand and was earnestly repeating their lyrics. They're like the grown-up version of those kids in middle school that drank Monster Energy every day and started smoking the devil's lettuce at like 14. Basically, everything bad that people exaggerate about Limp Bizkit is actually true for Hollywood Undead. In this case, not even the instrumentals save them, because they're the most generic low-effort shit you can imagine. Remember what I said about Slipknot doing the mask gimmick right? Well, this is how you do it wrong. And if someone tries to say,
"Hey man, they were just goofing around, they're not meant to be taken seriously."
oh yeah, dude, except even some of their most well-known hits try to actually be serious, and they're just... Lord. I thought about doing a bit where I just recite some of their lyrics and lose it, but honestly, I just couldn't get through it. This stuff is dangerously dumb, but worst of all, it's bland. It's not even so stupid that you can laugh along, it's actually just a bunch of nothing. Hollywood Undead doesn't hold up. I'm convinced it was just an actual psyop.
Hollywood Undead? More like Hollywood Brain Dead.
Here's your 5 songs. Let's move out of the whole rap nu metal thing and get into alternative rock or metal, which could literally just mean anything, really. But that's what most of these trendy bands were categorized as. Now let's go with something that's actually pretty unproblematic, on which most people will agree, I think, just so I don't immediately lose my remaining brain cells.
Alter Bridge.
These guys are the perfect radio band. Like, who actually hates Alter Bridge? These dudes are genuinely a good dad rock band for the newer generations. Are they breaking any new grounds? No. Do they have to? No. More than that, there is actually some top-tier musicianship in all of their albums. And obviously the standouts are Tremonti and Kennedy's guitar, not to mention the great vocals from the latter. Honestly, there isn't much to say about Alter Bridge, which is kind of the problem. It is a great band, don't get me wrong, and while they don't need to break any new grounds, it doesn't mean that they should play it so safe, right? But whatever, if it works for them, who am I to say anything? Do they still hold up? Yes, totally. They've always just been a super solid rock band. You always know what you're gonna get with them, which is both their strength and their weakness. If I had to give you 5 tracks, I would go with Blackbird, obviously, Slip to the Void, White Knuckles, Cry of Achilles, and Shed My Skin.
Seether.
So, this one kinda hurts. I used to really like Seether, which is weird because I didn't actually know many of their songs. The problem with Seether is that, well, their songwriting is incredibly generic most of the time. It's not like these guys can't play, and Sean Morgan is a very good vocalist, but it seems like for a while he tried to build his whole persona around the fact that he does a spot-on impression of Kurt Cobain, and that's why many people probably know about them. Seriously, just listen to their Nirvana covers. It's actually spooky sometimes. Okay, what are some good things that I can say about Seether? Well, when they were still under the name Sarin Gas, they had a bit more of a unique sound, I guess. They seem like fun guys with which I could go for drinks. Sean Morgan is actually much more dirty in his lyrics than the other bands in the genre, which I can appreciate. Their name is really funny now. And that's it. I'm sad now. Seether doesn't hold up for me, but I really wish they did. I'll still give you 5 songs. No Jesus Christ, Country Song, Love Her, Beer,
under the name Sarin Gas,
and Roses.
Speed round number 1. Avenged Sevenfold.
Never been a big fan, personally, but these guys are just pretty iconic. Great musicianship. I know that many people learn guitar through their songs. M. Shadow's voice either works for you or it doesn't, but they totally hold up.
Five Finger Death Punch.
Basically music for 35-year-olds who drive a truck and beat their wife but also feel bad about it.
Dope.
So now we get to my holy trifecta. I used to listen to many bands, but these next three were my actually bread and butter. Like, I can remember by heart almost all of their songs, especially the last band. And I've got some opinions.
Number 1. Breaking Benjamin.
I think that Breaking Benjamin never got as big as some of the other bands on this list, and it's a shame. These guys are actually solid, honestly. Saturate slaps. It's the perfect high school alt metal album. They did kinda become more generic after that, in my opinion, and I don't really care for their latest releases.
But these boys knew how to write a darn song.
It's a shame that they're mostly remembered for Diary of Jane, which, by the way, is a banger, because they had many other cool songs. Their music often sounds more textured when compared to their competitors. And it's probably due to a few factors. Great drumming, great bass playing, some great guitar work with riffs for days, also using baritones, which is very cool, and the use of acoustic guitars on many of their songs to give them that bit of added harmonic layering and depth. As is often the case, the first thing that many will notice is the vocals. And I get it, Burnley often has these overbearing, dramatic vocals, but to me it just works, although that may be just because of mere exposure effect. Their music is quite bombastic, leaning often into the heavier metal sound, which I think complements Burnley's voice quite well. Also, come on, they wrote a song for Halo 2, how cool is that? All in all, Breaking Benjamin gets the stamp of approval from me, especially Saturate. Just listen to that album, it's so fun. The 5 songs would be Medicate, Shallow Bay, Hopeless, Forget It, and Sugarcoat.
Papa Roach.
Guys, AI has actually existed since 1993, only it's been kept in the hands of Papa Roach for all this time. I say that because I cannot, in the heart of me, believe that a human being wrote their song lyrics. This is the most generic and incoherent bunch of nothing that I've ever heard. And I'm saying it as someone who was a huge fan of Papa Roach. Like, they were consistently my number 2, sometimes even number 1 favorite band. And I remember it because that shit was important to me. Like, I would actually sit there and think, which one is actually my favorite band? Am I more of a this kind of guy? Or this, perhaps? I can't deny that they've been very important to me for getting me into rock music. But looking back, I'm actually kind of ashamed. I didn't know better, and most importantly, I didn't actually understand English at the time.
Cause I've lost my innocence, and I'm a stranger, a life changer. I'm a man that's not afraid of danger. I walk my own path and blaze my own trail, cause I'm not afraid to derail. I won't get in line or be a middleman, so f*** you, I'll make my own plan. And I got respect and I don't neglect the people that I really care to protect. Am I a failure if I got nothing to lose? No, I'm not a failure. I got something to prove.
Like, what are you talking about? Who are you talking to? What's the point? This shit sounds like Vennu Malesh wrote it.
Dude, check it out.
Scratch that, at least the guy seems to be doing it in earnest.
I feel irrational, so confrontational. To tell the truth, I am getting away with murder. It is impossible to never tell the truth, but the reality is I'm getting away with murder.
You know what hurts the most when looking back on these guys? One thing that only now I'm noticing is that they actually seem like the perfect example of industry plants. And I hear you typing already about the fact that being industry plants means nothing and that most of these bands had a huge label, so they all kinda were. What I mean here is that nothing about their music or style seems original at all. It actually seems like all of their stuff was written by a bunch of businessmen in a room. Either that or Jacoby Shaddix actually never gave a shit about his lyrics. Like, read some of them, please.
We are the walking dead. Swallow the lies we're fed. Uncover your eyes, uncover your eyes, uncover the truth and you realize we're hanging by a thread. We are the walking dead.
Open your third eye! The government's corrupt, yo! Open your third eye! Open your third eye!
This is the lyric version of the horoscope. I can't believe a human being wrote this kind of generic garbage. And I'm sorry to say all of this because these guys could actually play. Like, they were solid musicians, don't get me wrong. But it's also by the numbers. Also, of course, they're the ones that made Last Resort, which everybody knows. The song has a squeaky clean version on YouTube, and I actually don't understand if it's a joke, because half of the words are censored. On the Much Music version, which utilizes the radio edit, the word fuck is completely removed, with no replacement. Which, you know, I get it, I do that too, that's fine. On the MTV and Vivo version, the words cut, bleeding, die, life, from the line if I took my life tonight, and suicide were also muted. After original airings of the video on television, some networks went so far as to additionally censor words such as suffocation and even the title of the song itself. Bro, just make it an instrumental at that point. They censored the title of the song. Please go listen to that version because it's actually insane. I'm sincerely amazed by this. Doesn't this just scream corporate? I think it's better if I stop before bursting a blood vessel. Papa Roach somehow used to be one of my favorite bands. I don't know how it happened, but if I didn't already know so many of their songs by heart, I'd probably think they're the most generic and by-the-numbers rock band that has ever existed. The only song that I could actually sincerely recommend would probably be Tightrope, which is actually just a bonus track at the end of Infest's last track. It's not even its own goddamn track. That's how hard they had to fall in line. Let's move on, please.
3 Days Grace.
So here we are. I expect many of you to think that I'll reiterate the same stuff that I said about Papa Roach here, but against all odds, I think that Adam Gontier era 3 Days Grace actually still holds up well enough. It might just be the nostalgia speaking, I know, for like 2 years of my life these guys became my idols. And yes, much of what I said before could kinda be applied to them, but I don't know, there's just something much more earnest in Gontier's voice in my opinion. When he spouts those generic rock lyrics, I actually believe that he wrote them, and that he's just kinda bad at it. And I do absolutely love his voice, it's part of my DNA at this point. If you listen to the stuff they made after the guy from My Darkest Hour became their new singer, it's not like the quality of the lyrics changed much, but when he's the one singing them, I'm just like, hell no! You wanna hear something ridiculous? I just unlocked a memory, and this is confession time again. When I was in middle school, I really loved creative writing and I really loved 3 Days Grace. At one point we were learning about diaristic writing and our assignment was to create a short fictional diary. So what did young me do? You guessed it, I wrote a diary from Adam Gontier's point of view, specifically about his time going through rehab and coming up with the lyrics for their second album. And I really got like emotionally dark about it. Well, as dark as a 13-year-old can get, I guess. With the understanding of addiction of a 13-year-old also, I remember that I finished it with him finally getting through withdrawals and writing down the lyrics of one of their songs, probably Never Too Late. So yeah, very embarrassing. And that's how much these guys meant to me. I still remember every single lyric from their 4 albums with Adam, and you just find in so many YouTube comments under their songs people genuinely saying that Gontier saved their life through his songs, which has to count for something. And I can't, in good faith, just say that they're outright bad. When I want to go back to something nostalgic that reminds me of my teenage years, this is who I choose. To be more objective, I think it's just fine radio rock with a good vocalist. I'd mostly recommend you their first album, but I also think that Sign of the Times is a really solid track. So my 5 songs would be Overrated, Burn, Sign of the Times, Home, Take Me Under.
Speed round number 2. Disturbed.
Do you remember the guy that made the meme video about every Disturbed song sounding the same? Yeah, that's exactly how I hear them. Also, they got this weird school shooter appeal, which I don't get. Just watch the Vengeful One video where the skull-headed, black-hooded guy with a black trench coat starts just executing random news anchors with his sawed-off shotguns. It reminds me of that shitty controversial game that everybody shit on. What was it, like Hate or something? The Hatred, maybe? The thing that I remember most about them is when David Draiman had to give out the prize for Best Vocalist at the 2013 Golden Gods, and the other dude calls him on stage saying,
"You know him, he's got that crazy thing sticking through the middle of his chin. What are those things called?"
And Draiman takes the mic and says,
"I call them pussy hooks, brother."
That just makes my skin crawl. And 13-year-old me was like,
Damn, he's so cool.
outside of their own samey butt rock music, they've also made one of the worst covers in the world. Yeah, I'm talking about that god-awful Sound of Silence cover. It's compressed and retouched to a mind-numbing degree and just completely butchers the point of the original song. If you like it, stay away from me, because I'm genuinely scared of you. I hope to never hear from these guys ever again.
Maximum the Hormone.
Who put these guys on the list? Oh, me? Listen, this is not just an example of Japanese thing good, okay? These guys absolutely slap. They're an insane genre-bending quartet. Amazing bass, amazing guitar playing and drumming, some crazy-ass vocals and sudden genre switches. Obviously, most of you will remember What's Up People, which was used as the first Death Note opening. But these guys have tons of super fun songs and they always reinvent themselves. Do yourself a favor and go listen to them.
Skillet.
So this is the band for which you can tell your parents.
It's alright, it's not the devil's music. These guys are Christian.
While I was writing this, they released a new song, and it's literally one of the worst things I probably ever heard. In the video, they have these supposedly offensive comments plastered around, and I mean, just look at this. Girls don't belong in rock? Really? Are you actually 12 years old? Is this actually controversial to you? Girls don't belong in rock? It's 2024, guys, and you're like 50 years old. What the f is your problem? I'll just leave you with this tiny list I made for a moment, right? Girls don't belong in rock, you know, that's what everybody thinks. Right, yeah. They're incredibly phony and jump on any message that can sell their mediocre music. And now the message is,
Everybody's such a snowflake, you can't even speak your mind anymore.
and stuff like that, you know, with your generic lyrics that actually mean absolutely nothing. And if you think that anything they write is genuine, well, I'm sorry for you, but you might be kind of naive. Just saying.
Bullet for My Valentine.
So, I've never been a fan of these boys, but they're obviously very capable musicians. And they probably got many people into metalcore and metal in general. I can't hate on that, that's just cool. I can see them being one of the most nostalgic bands along with Avenged Sevenfold for many metalheads in my age bracket. So yeah, nothing more to add. If you still like them, I get it, as opposed to other bands.
Last part, the weirdos.
And so we get to the last two bands that I really loved at the time. Now, these guys could be categorized under a bunch of different genres, but they really carved their own spot and deserve to be recognized for that. The first one is
System of a Down.
Everybody knows about System of a Down. These guys are an absolute classic. From this whole list, they might be the most well-respected band from fans of metal and other genres alike. And it's easy to see why. They have one of the most solid discographies ever. Many think that still this album is a bit weaker, but honestly, I just don't see it. I think that Toxicity is just so good that it's hard to live up to it. But in my opinion, they do for the most part. Sod created their own distinguishable and unique sound, due in no small part to Serge and Darren's vocals. But even just their riffing and use of different rhythms and the folk influences are all immediately recognizable. They didn't really sound like anyone before or after.
System of a Down were a heavy band, you could say a heavy metal band, who didn't follow those rules. They didn't have the rhythms that you'd hear in a typical, you wouldn't hear a Metallica rhythm, you'd hear a System of a Down rhythm, which was different, dun, 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 like different gallops.
Also, they're probably the band with the weirdest lyrics on this list, and that's gotta count for something when you compete with f***ing Corey Taylor. It was always crazy to me seeing how many people actually listen to at least some of their songs while knowing nothing about heavy music in general. I remember just random people in middle school bopping by up like it was a normal pop song, which just goes to show how much damn range these guys had. Basically, while every other band on the scene was copying trends and each other, bands like System of a Down and Deftones just locked in and went their own way. If you think about what I said, about most of these bands starting off strong and then kinda going downhill, it's not surprising that these dudes are still relevant when they more or less kept their quality so consistent. They also have some of the most quotable lines ever in their songs. All in all, System of a Down are an absolute classic. You want 5 songs? How about 5 albums? There you go. So now let's finish off with a big one.
Marilyn Manson.
In my 2024 bingo card, I definitely didn't have Manson's comeback. This is kinda crazy to see. After years of him looking like a bloated goth Nicolas Cage and sounding frankly terrible most of the time, he finally apparently got sober and lost a lot of weight and looks almost like his Hollywood era self. When the new single came out, I actually was so giddy to see him back on track, because if there was a musician that really shaped me when I was 15 or 16, it was Marilyn Manson. You can say whatever you want about this guy, but you can't deny he's one of the most influential musicians from the late 90s and early 2000s. Yes, I will agree that almost everything he made after Hollywood is kinda trash, except The Pale Emperor and a few good songs from other LPs. But man, that run from Antichrist Superstar through Mechanical Animals and to end on Hollywood, that's a very solid 3-album run. And the thing about Manson is he wasn't only a musical icon, but also a cultural icon in general. He was the voice of angry, edgy, emo and goth kids, and the way he made Christian moms seethe, it's just amazing to see. His lyrics used to be scathing, dirty, against everything that's part of the status quo. Then they mostly became a collection of dad jokes pretty much. And his older music videos are still some of the most interesting and high-effort music videos ever, in my opinion. I do feel that he too suffered from the trend of making super long and bloated albums, but I get it, he was making
Le deep narrative conceptual album.
I think that many people detest Marilyn Manson because they haven't actually listened to many of his songs and don't know that the man had a huge range. Even just in the 3-album run I mentioned, each one sounds very different. Antichrist Superstar is very industrial, gritty and angry. There's lots of screaming and disturbing imagery. It's generally percussion heavy and Manson sounds kinda deranged half of the time. Mechanical Animals is Bowie inspired, and it takes more of a glam approach to his previous industrial sound. The songs are less heavy and more emotional, the sound is much more refined, and I would say that this is definitely his best work. Hollywood is probably everyone's favorite. It's super refined and mostly darker than Mechanical Animals. Sounds pretty sad and dystopic most of the time and has some of his most classic songs. After that, he made pretty albums. I absolutely detest Golden Age of Grotesque. I think he completely gave up on songwriting on that album except for Spade, which bangs. Then the other two have a few decent songs. Born Villain is a travesty and you should skip it. Pale Emperor is actually alright. And the two he made after that, I couldn't actually sit through. Oh, I forgot to mention the very first album, which actually has some bangers. But yeah, this guy seems to be making a big comeback now after all of the accusations of sexual misconduct and other misbehavior. I don't know how that whole situation is actually going, I don't know how true any of it is, but it's one of those things for which, as the Johnny Depp situation showed us, we should tread lightly, you know? The whole situation is quite heartbreaking for my inner 15-year-old who thought that listening to Manson and being an atheist were like the coolest things ever. Overall, I think that Marilyn Manson has made a bunch of classics, but that his other stuff doesn't hold up for the most part. I'll give you 10 songs this time. I don't like the drugs, but the drugs like me.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that on Mechanical Animals there's also gospel choirs, which is like amazing.
Disassociative. The Speed of Pain, Irresponsible Hate Anthem, If I Was Your Vampire, Odds of Even, Target Audience, Coma Black, Tourniquet, The Dope Show. So, in the end, what can we say? Were those teen angst bands actually good? Well, it seems to me that many of them actually were, even though at the time they were often considered mediocre or worse. Now, certainly many hold up, especially thanks to nostalgia, but it would be wrong to say that it's the only reason. As we've seen, many of them, if nothing else, had very talented musicians playing the instrumental, and often your appreciation might verge on if you like the singer or not. The worst offenders in being generic seem to be the alt-rock or post-grunge types of bands. Those often played really by-the-numbers radio music, recycling the same lyrics over and over, and rarely having any originality. While, at least, the guys in the nu metal scene were actually trying to build their own distinguished sound. Overall, listening to these bands again is a nice way to try and relive those years in your head, but it's also actually just pretty good music most of the time. So I hope you enjoyed this, I hope you found some new music, and if not, I hope you at least related to my experiences a little bit. If you got mad at any point, well, you probably wouldn't have made it this far, let's be real. I'll wait for Disturbed, Five Finger Death Punch and Skillet fans to insult me in the comments. Until next time, probably with something more horror themed, and see you, space teenagers.